Marnie Stockman. Wow, I love talking to Marnie. I mean, the what she does now is she helps small to medium-sized businesses, managed service providers as well with customer success. She has a background in education. She was teaching high school, and then she became what's called a success manager, success uh, coordinator, I believe. But so she gathered all the data to help students how they're doing in testing. She cites examples how she's found some students that were, that had some issues and were able to help them. Like, what do we do with all that data? So the platform that aggregates all that data for schools. Eventually, she reached out to them and had strong opinions on some changes that need to be made, and she eventually worked for them. And now she helps businesses with that. Great background in helping small businesses. What lessons do you learn from academics that you could bring over to small to medium sized businesses? We discussed that. She has two books. They're excellent. The book on customer success for MSPs and the MSP's owner's handbook. She has a whole process. Wait till you hear her process about how she writes. It's fascinating. It involves uh, getting off the grid. The other thing I discovered is that those things that she wears when she's walking around in the neighborhood, is some of the sweaters and hats are things that she knits herself. She loves to knit. She's also um, played D1 level volleyball. I just a fascinating woman. She's a great speaker. She's a CEO, of course, of Life Cycle Insights. Really enjoyed the conversation. She was graceful enough to speak at our event a little while back, and she's a great speaker as well. But you're going to really enjoy this conversation. Thanks so much for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. The next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business? And it lasted over 25 years. Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Marnie Stockman, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it. What are the biggest lessons that you have learned from going from the academic world to the business world, small business world, MSP world?
Some of it is that it's not that much different, to be
Mm,
quite honest, which is interesting. So there's a huge need for data everywhere, right? So I'm very used to that in the academic world, came from an assessment and an analytics space, and was a math teacher and accountability person. So I always looked at data. And coming to this space, I find the same thing. What's
mm,
interesting is I made some assumptions that in an IT space that folks would be pro Excel spreadsheets, and in fact, I don't find that.
mm,
so, um, so I find that interesting. So that piece, I think, was unique. The need to simplify data for everyone, I think, is very comparable, and also the need to educate. Right. So I was obviously educating 16-year-olds, but it's not really different in this space, in that the MSPs need to know how to educate their end user. right? Because you are selling them something they don't understand. And without the education, it sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher with the wah, 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 wah,
Mm,
wah, wah,
mm.
wah. But if you can, I quoted Simon Sinek's Start With Why. If you can get them to understand your why and believe in your why of cybersecurity or delivering business outcomes through technology, they'll buy your what. So I'll go with data and education. I could wax philosophical for days, but I'll start with that.
Now, when you say data, like, break it down for me a little bit.
Yeah. So let me tell you what I find in the space that I think is interesting is because it started as a break fix space. There is a single point of failure. I'm going to solve that problem. There's a single asset that has a single problem, a single device, a single switch, a single something that we are very good in the space of collecting lots of data points. We are less good at aggregating that into useful information
Hmm.
that you can take larger actionable actions from. So I think that's why there are a lot of folks that, again, a lot of good data collection tools, not good aggregation tools. So reporting, making it easy for the end user to understand. There's a lot of the last thing as a business owner I really want to talk about is all of my flux capacitors and what widget needs a new cog, etc. uh, Instead, like I always talk about red, yellow, green reporting, but just simplifying it into what is a problem, what do I need to do to fix it. So in the data, it doesn't just have to be one asset at a time, but how can I look across my network, how can I look across my business? Particularly business analytics, I think, is interesting for this space.
And in academics, you said, you're a high school teacher, you became a assistant principal. I mean, what kind of data was collected there?
Yeah. So think about all the tests you took. That's data, right?
Uh,
So I, at the end of my career in education, I was the accountability coordinator. So I was in charge of all of the testing, right? If any parents are listening, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those scores you get sent home and find out how your school did and how your kids did. That's what
hmm.
I was in charge of running for the school system. So all of that data gives information to teachers. And again, one on one, if I sit down with any student, super easy to say, Joe, looks like we need to help have some, work on fractions. The reason teachers give tests is to collect that data across all of the students at once, to quickly grab it so that we can say, all right, looks like the whole class needs help in fractions. I suspect folks listening are going to say, heck, I probably need help on fractions,
Mm.
right? Everyone does. So what I think, that's what I'm talking about, the aggregation piece. It's inefficient to look at one device at a time, one switch at a time, one anything at a time. If that weren't inefficient, teachers would just interview each child, right? But imagine what that class would feel like, where you're sitting with 30 people and they're going to spend 15 minutes with one person, one at a
Hmm.
time, right? While the other 29, of course, sit silently and patiently and wait, right? It's just not efficient. Same thing when you're using scanners, et cetera, to collect data across a network. You need to be able to aggregate it so you can take action faster.
And you said you're surprised that the business owners, the MSPs, the business owners don't use Excel. They're not collecting that data. They're more tech focused and more worried about solving problems.
Well, I think there are two different takes on Excel. They're the lovers and the haters of Excel. There's no middle
Mm.
ground. This is just clearly a division,
Polarizing product. Yeah.
polarizing conversation about how folks feel about Excel. So there are many folks that are danger enough, like they're good enough to be dangerous with Excel. So they feel like that's automation. But Excel, unless you've set up macros to actually run programming against it, right, is just collecting that in rows and columns. So that's digital collection of information, but it's not automation of it. I'm a big fan, and I always talked in the ed tech space around the process maturity model. So this is, let's think about your processes. Are they undefined? Are they manual, right? So I'm starting to document a consistent process. Are they digital? So now I have this documented maybe in that Excel spreadsheet.
Hmm.
There's a large jump to go from digital to automated. And when your information and insights are automated, then you can get insights and action. That's transformative. So that's where I think don't make the mistake that digital information is the same as automation and insights.
And where did this love of this, the I'm gonna say passion, where did it come from, Marnie?
um, so I've been a geek for a long time. So I was always a numbers data nerd. Um,
Hmm,
my parents, it's kind of funny. I remember young. So my mom tells the story when I was 2.5 or 3
whoa,
that we were walking towards some horses. And my baby sister was in a stroller. I must have been 3. And she said, so Marnie, and she picked up she had some pennies in her pocket. If we wanted to give two pennies to you and me and Karen and dad, right? How many we have? I said 8. And then she said, well, what would happen if we wanted to give them to our grandparents too? I said, oh, we would need 16. So like just early on, numbers and
hmm,
data kind of intrigued me. So yeah, I'm a nerd from way back, but I think it's, the human brain wants to put patterns around things.
right.
And when you can, it's just super efficient to attach a number and a pattern and turn it into a color or an insight. So I was a math major. Just it's always been intriguing to me. I think also there's power behind it, right? When you can problem solve by looking at data, you're much more efficient. And one of the things that I'm passionate about is problem solving. And I think in the IT space, I see that. That is really why so many MSPs become MSPs. They like to help and they like to solve problems. And I
Hmm.
think data can empower that and just increase the speed of it.
Do you see certain colors when you see numbers?
I don't. I know some do. My daughter has a friend that answers questions in color, so I'm not. I'm not that. I don't have that skill. I wish I did because I think that is amazing. It is funny in the like parlor tricks that we do. My dad and son memorize license plates accidentally. So my dad would come
Wow.
home from work and say, "Hey, like I saw Mr. Thurber was at the gym," and I'd say, "Oh, did you say hi?" He's like, "Oh no, I just saw." Blue, blah, 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 license plate, JXLR.
Wow.
I'm like, oh, okay. You know,
Wow.
um, I more saw patterns and numbers, in different ways. But we do all have our geeky things around numbers, but no colors in numbers.
Yeah, I think it's called synesthesia, and I have friends that, they look at me like I'm crazy. The number 5, "You don't see red there?" And I say, "No, I just see the number 5. I don't see a color." And it's
Yeah.
just so vivid to them. And I know there's artists that
Yep.
have musical notes and colors and,
So
uh
we know two folks that have it. One is really strong, and it is very much like a
really?
parlor trick. It's pretty interesting.
Wow. And you went So why the jump? So you were, you were at the public schools,
Yep.
and then you were you were. It's an interesting title, by the way. You're in charge of accountability. Talk to me about like that title. That just seems odd. It seems
So,
great.
think about, if you think back to schooling and the No Child Left Behind Act, and schools were
Right.
held accountable for reporting their data and saying
Ah,
how school systems were doing, right? So they had to publicly start publishing. 95% of our students have passed this assessment. So they are accountable. So I was in charge of reporting out the math and English scores. In doing that, guess what? There's a lot of data. And
mm,
so I used a platform, an ed tech platform that was an assessment platform that collected that data. And it is how we would track student progress toward their success. So we would do our own internal assessments and say, okay, I think Joe's going to pass this test, or I think Joe's not, and we should intervene ahead of time, right?
hmm,
Like you should, it's just like wearing your Fitbit versus going to a physical, right? If you're going to go to the physical, why don't we try to plan ahead and get in a better shape when we get there? So, in the course of doing that, I used one particular platform and I ended up presenting in front of the owners of the company, the founder of the company. And and I was pretty loud about product enhancement requests and things I
hmm.
wanted. In a shocking turn of events, I had things I wanted the product to do, And we were at one conference, and he said, he wanted to walk me to the car. And I thought, well, I've dated with this company long enough. They're going to ask me, like, I flirted with the company long enough. They're going to ask me to date. So they asked me to come work for the company. And it's interesting because in that position, in the land of places where I see similarities between education and tech, um, I believe that the role I did for that ed tech company was comparable to a VCIO. I
Huh.
was now not in the world of technology, but in the world of this particular assessment analytics, because my role was an internal and external consultant where I would aim to help the school systems deliver their outcomes, increase their test scores, have better equity measures, et cetera, with the technology. So I was the English to English
Hmm.
translator and someone who would help them drive school system outcomes. But I think that is exactly what MSPs and VCIOs really do now is we are helping small business owners deliver their business outcomes through the thoughtful use of technology. So they're a consultant in that, they're consulting on risk exposure, right? So this is what we need to be more secure, more stable, et cetera, more productive, right? Save on FTEs. So I think the type of role, it's why I understood kind of the need of how to work in this space. So in the course of working for that ed tech company, we were acquired 3 times. I left and was acquired by the same company again. So
Wow.
some of the developers and I thought, we learned to scale the support and customer success process where our sole goal was to drive raving fans. So
Hmm.
we really wanted to do that for a company for ourselves. And we were out looking for a problem to solve. And I ran into Alex Farling, who was an MSP in Delaware for 16 and a half years. So he and I had played volleyball for 23 years together. And and I said, this is what we do. Are there any problems in your space that need solving? And he said, yeah, I spent 8 hours together, air quotes, cobbling together my QBR. And as a customer success manager, so I ran customer success in the ed tech company, I had done and watched hundreds of business reviews. I have strong opinions on business reviews. Um, and the interesting piece is that our other co-founders have a ton of experience with the data collection. So, QBR building, development, and presentation is all about collecting data, presenting the data, and making recommendations based on it. So we were well suited as a team to kind of jump into that space.
Very cool. You use some acronyms there that maybe listeners. So VCIO is a virtual chief information
Information
officer.
officer. Yeah.
FTE is a full time
Full
equivalent.
time.
It's
Yeah.
it's an employee.
Employee.
QBR is a quarterly business review.
Sorry
Just
about
in
that. I
just
didn't
in
even
case.
know half of those acronyms 2 or 3 years ago. And
Yeah,
now look at me
exactly.
spitting out like everyone understands them.
We just use them so loosely and so open all the time that we don't. I don't think about it. Is it a good system the way the schools are set up with the data aggregation and this accountability, director? Is it a good system?
So I think it all depends on how it's implemented. The usual, it depends. I think I'm not using it as a cop out. I see systems that are excessively productive and effective with it. And I see others that use it as a CYA, which I don't think is
Mm.
as effective. So those that use it to make meaningful impact on students, I'm all in, right? It's one of those, what is inspected is what is expected.
Hmm.
So if you're not inspecting the data, like, then why are you collecting it? I say that all the time. If you're actually collecting all this information, you're not doing anything with it, you're doing it, harm. But when you're collecting information from children and using that to help them improve, I think it's the critical way to get that movement for sure. People have different modes of doing that. That's where you see the flavors of what works, and sadly, sometimes what doesn't work.
Hmm. Yeah, well said. And even the testing, there's lots of controversy about that and how that's done. Do you have any opinion on that?
Oh, strong opinions for sure. And it goes back to if you're collecting the data and not doing anything with it, then what are you doing with the data, right? Like, then
Mm.
why are you doing it to begin with? But
Mm.
if in fact you're collecting important data that helps you make decisions about how helping children, then it is really critical.
Wow.
So I think I've worked with hundreds of school systems who meaningfully spend time looking at why they're giving assessments and what they're giving. And I think if people have conversations with educators on why are we giving this assessment and is it a good assessment, right? That is what we're trained to do.
Mm,
um, I think it makes a big impact. Are there folks out there that don't do it right? Absolutely. But again, if you're collecting the information for the right reason and then taking action on it, it can be really impactful. The other interesting piece is there's a lot of research out there on what makes for better tests and what makes for worse tests. So I think
right.
keeping an eye on that, you know, kids learn in different ways. And one of those things, like if you test everybody on how to swim, the elephant's going to think they're a failure at being a fish, right?
Hmm.
So you've got to make sure you have something that suits everybody's needs. In order to really drive, I always say, you know, we want children to be the best versions of them they can be. So how can we collect the data to help them become the best versions of them?
But it's still interesting to me. I agree, by the way. When I say "but," I didn't mean to contradict. It's
I
still
was like,
interesting
oh,
to
this will
me.
be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, you're supposed to ignore everything before the "but." I didn't mean that. So, you went from teacher to assistant principal to, like, the supervisor of accountability. I mean, assistant principal, maybe the hardest job in America. I mean, it's a lot of discipline, it's a lot of
Yeah.
were you collecting data at that point?
Oh, yeah. So first, I don't play when it comes to being assistant principal. So like
Yeah, I can
you'll
see
learn
that.
quick in under Miss Stockman's rule how we're gonna work. So I have a string of folks that'd be happy to come on your podcast and tell you exactly what
Really?
righteous justice can look like.
Hmm.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I just went and visited one of the. So they're the folks that I was assistant principal for. They're now about 28, and one of them just had a baby, and he invited me to meet his
Wow.
baby. Who they want him to call me Mom Stockman for the record. I
Uh,
think that's funny. So discipline records, absolutely, but I also collected test data on the students because here's not a shocking surprise. Sometimes your biggest discipline problems are discipline problems because they're academic problems as well. And
mm.
they're masking it with behaviors. So I will tell you this little story because it is one that I used in the ed tech space a ton. I was asked to be assistant principal for a year because they did not have one. So I was the math supervisor already. They asked me to do this as an interim position.
Ah.
So 3 days before school started, without much warning, I went to the guidance counselor and said, will you give me the names of the top 10 students that I'm most likely to see in my office the first week, the first month of school
Hmm.
if we don't do something? So she gave me their names, and I had the assessment platform that I told you about, and I had a yearbook. So I looked up their names, their faces, their schedules, their test results. As they came in the first day, I greeted them all by name. And then I decided the first 5 days of school, I was going to go to every period of every kid's class and stop in so they wouldn't be anonymous to me. And
Wow.
in doing that, I found a kid who didn't fit the mold. I was 11th grade administrator. I'm in a 10th grade English class, so kids had already failed, right? And I found this one, and this kid shouted out to me. I didn't find him. He called right out, hello. And I thought, who are you shouting out to an administrator, right? So I went and I looked him up, and he had failed half of his classes in high school, but had passed all of his state assessments that were requirements for graduation. So, like,
Wow.
there was this mix. I went back to his middle school, and he was red everywhere. He'd failed everything. I went back to elementary school. He was blue. He was double advanced in everything. When I when I had a conversation with him about it, he tells me about when his grandfather passed away in middle school. The last thing he said to him was, I want you to stay out of trouble and I want you to go to college. And he said, Miss Stockman, I figured out how to stay out of trouble, but I don't know how to get myself to college. Will you help? So this is what I mean. If you've got the right data in front of you, like,
Hmm.
so I hit 6 clicks in a platform and saw this child that was like red, green, what's going on with them? And he ended up, right, one of the first family members to go to an HBUC. So you can make an impact with data is my statement there. But we checked data all of the time for sure.
And how far does data go in your life, Marty? Are you, you know, is your car always full of gas? Is
Right.
there
So I am one more trip to the airport away from hitting 10,000 miles on the car. So it is enough
Oh,
that I can tell you what my car is at right now for
that's
sure. Not always on full because I'm well aware of the limits that I have to get there, right? I
interesting.
use the data probably annoyingly to my children for sure, metrics on all the pieces. I'm a Fitbit wearer, so I track those types of things. I wouldn't say I'm neurotic about too much, but my children definitely do notice that numbers are my thing.
When I use another one, but similar, and in the first week, I started seeing, okay, this is how I sleep. Here's what my heart rate is, and then it just gets to a point. It's probably been collecting for a couple years. What do you do with all that information?
Yeah, that is one of those that I don't use it enough for sure. My mom has recently gotten one that will tell her, if she's having heart arrhythmia or whatever. So I
Mm,
think the medical pieces around that are interesting.
mm.
Now I do it more as a baseline check. So I'll check back and say, like, I can tell when I'm stressed because my baseline heart rate's not at 61. It'll be running at 68 for a while. So I'll try to just, in the land of health and wellness and mental health, I think it's good if you've got a way to say, "Ooh, clearly I didn't think I was stressed, but I am." So that's one way I use it, and I just keep it as a monitor. Just to the pants are always a good way to monitor as well, but
Yes, yes, yes.
but
Your
I'll use
clothes.
additional metrics, triangulate that data.
And you're also an author. You wrote 2 great books in the tech. I've had the pleasure of reading them both. You gave me I think you gave me both of them actually.
Love
And,
'em.
literally the book on customer success for MSPs and the MSP's owner's handbook. Talk to me about your process of writing.
Yeah. So the first one, so I started writing this during COVID, and we had moved at the beginning of COVID, which means I don't know my neighbors. And I also like to, I'm in the house, I work from home. So in COVID, I would literally see no other humans. So I would go take a walk and write. And the first book, I would take a clipboard with me. But the neighbors, again, didn't know who I was. And so I had one ask if I was a homeowners association, like, "Yeah, your grass
Survey.
is too tall." I had one pull over and say, "I asked my husband if he thought you were CIA." And I was like, "Yes, this is a CIA issued green floral clipboard. You got me." I thought, I can't imagine that
Hmm.
was an actual conversation. And I had somebody else say, "Can I see what you're writing?" But my process was to start with a big mess that I felt like needed untangling. So I started with a 30-minute brainstorm of really what I saw in customer success from where we had been and what I see in customer success in the MSP space. Because we recognized that there was a gap in technology that people talk about. I always say QBRs and customer success were like the weather. Everybody was talking about it, nobody was doing anything about it.
Mhm.
And so we felt like there are things to track that people aren't tracking because it's focused on the human element. So in this world, we're very good at, again, gadgets and gadgets and switches and notifications. But what about the human element? That's where the biggest risk is. Let's face it. If you turn on MFA, you're 84% of your way through most of the most of the security concerns, right? And the same thing is true with notifications. But that last 15% of the human element is what could create churn for your company, but it's also what could drive a referral and for a raving fan if you get it right. So my process was to outline what we had seen work in the SaaS world of ed tech, and then think about what that would look like in the space for managed service providers. So I kind of outlined the big idea that we'd seen and then projected what those metrics would look like. And then, frankly, we built a platform to walk through what we wrote the book about.
Hmm. A couple of acronyms: MFA, multi-factor authentication,
Exactly.
used to help people break passwords or help alongside their password, and SaaS is software as a service in the education space, of course. And so, your process of writing the book, Marnie, you got a brain dump about 30 minutes, you said, and then you walk outside. You walk outside with a clipboard to get off the grid and not be interrupted.
That's part of it. So I like the fresh air, the movement, all of those things frees up your brain to think about other pieces. So I would create an outline. So I took the brain dump. created the outline, created the sub bullets in the outline. And then frankly, it forces me to not then go decide laundry's a better idea. Laundry's never a better
Mm,
idea, but like that's sometimes when you've got writer's block, you think laundry's a better idea.
right.
No cooking dinner, no let's go have snacks. Like I'm going to go for a walk. I'll be back in an hour and I'm going to write 3 pages. With the second book, and I'm sure people on the call are thinking, like, you didn't think of that in the first one. I did more speech to text. So I would go out with 3 questions that I wanted to answer.
Ah,
I again have my clipboard with me. I didn't want people thrown off that I'd changed jobs, and then I would record basically me answering the question, and then would go back and refine it. Sadly, I'm a pencil paper kind of girl most of the time. So even after I speech to text it, I would then print out all of it so I could edit it and add
ah,
pieces in that I wanted. But that's what got the bulk of it done, is to really break it down into bite-sized components that you can then focus on. For each of the bite-sized pieces, you can probably tell from chatting with me, I like to tell stories.
yes.
So I'd want to tell a story that delivered the point of where we were heading. If you write a business book that is just fact, 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 or business, 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 it's hard to read and hard to digest because you don't have a way to hook it. So it's again Simon Sinek's why. If you can give the story or the why behind each of the pieces, it makes it very consumable so that they'll then do the work behind it. So that the first book, literally the book on customer success for MSPs, of course we wrote it so I could use that pun all of the time. Um, but the point was there's work to do for this. So we needed the stories to make it readable so that folks would do the work.
Mm,
So I hope I accomplished that. I've had some folks tell me I
you
have,
certainly have.
but I'm also willing to take debate on that.
So that initial brain dump you said for 30 minutes, is it a bunch of phrases and sentences? It's like a bunch of data that you have to parse out.
I started with kind of the big problem of like what is the end result of what I want? When I think about customer success, literally what mess am I solving for customer success? So some things immediately came to mind. So I sort of brain dumped the stories that I told in the book. So I said, well, how did I get into customer success? The owner had grown to the point where he couldn't handle all of his accounts himself and he needed to hand it over to me. So he and I both got $1 million accounts, different places in the country. And on Fridays, he would call me in a panic because he realized he hadn't talked to any of his customers that he was used to talking to. And he had just given them to me and he didn't know what I was doing with them.
Uh-huh.
Right. So on Fridays at 5:30, he'd be like, Marnie House, Hartford, Howard, Queen Anne, blah, blah, blah. He would list all of them. And I would go through. And the third Friday, I came at him this time. So we did this 2 Fridays in a row and I realized what his problem was. And so I created, in a shocking turn of events, an Excel spreadsheet where I said in red, yellow, green, okay, these are all green, happy as can be, right? This one's yellow. If it was red, I'd already contacted him about it and gave their needs and wants, which gave him some peace of mind of like, I
Hmm.
can hand over my baby, right? Which is my company to someone else to support the account. I can't remember who said the quote, but maybe it's Warren Buffett. It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to destroy
Mm.
it. And the worry when you're an owner is that you've built up the company on your reputation. And when you hand it over to a customer success manager that's going to take over the relationship, you worry that they're not going to do your company and your service to your reputation. So having that data where he could say, oh, everyone's happy, and could see that I justified it with various metrics really was the start of how we wrote the book, right? When I told that story, then the compelling reason for why we want to track health metrics makes sense. I want to see which of my customers are green every Monday. And if somebody's red, exec leadership is going to get on the bandwagon to figure out what to do to fix it.
And can a lot of the lessons does the book only work for MSPs? Could it be small businesses just in general?
We specifically wrote this one for managed service providers because the data we're collecting is specific to
Mm,
managed services, right? The concepts, I would say the first third of the book, where it's the stories around customer
yeah.
success, goes across everyone. there are tools out there for software companies to track these types of metrics. So Gainsight, Totango, Churn Zero, Plan Hat, CapDut, right? All of those types of companies, that is who tracks you when you are inside any application. So that I can say, like, oh, I can see Joe's used this 13 times today, right? You're a safe, you've adopted the platform, right? The first time they tell stories in some books about Twitter, that when they first launched Twitter, people would sign up but then never tweet because they didn't know what to tweet.
Mm,
And they increased adoption a ton when they started saying, hello world, right? We're going to ship this out for you. Like, we've got to tweet, because then, like, you broke the barrier. We've done the first thing. So there are already thought leaders in the world of customer success, but it's typically been geared toward software tools. We wrote the book specifically for managed service providers because there are some things unique to this industry that customer success is dependent on. How aligned folks are to your standards and best practices is really important. That could be a health metric, right? That's not something that a software vendor would have.
yeah, and you really bring home the point of, businesses are in the people business, whether we're fixing computers, technology, pools, or plumbing, or, whatever it is, you still have to make the customer, the client happy that owns those things, and showing them reports and showing them updates on what's being done, especially something as proactive as managed service providers is very necessary. And it'll gain that longevity. It'll gain a raving fan.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a book out there called Raving Fans, which is one of my favorites. So it's a quirky little book, but it's a good one. Another one that I like to reference is called Getting Naked by Patrick
Oh
Lencioni.
yeah.
I always like to make sure I give the last name so folks don't Google that without it. But the power of that book is to show folks how to be business consultants, even if they are not experts in the business they're consulting with.
Mhm.
And I think that's a struggle in the MSP community. I hear the words imposter syndrome a lot because they're not a lawyer and yet they are consulting for lawyers. They are
Mm.
not a dentist and they are consulting for a dentist. And this book really talks about how to have conversations around consulting, right? Like, we're going to talk through this together and let the dentist be the expert in dentistry. They actually quite want to be that, right? They wouldn't trust you to be that. But if you can show, like, ask them their business needs and show them how you can help solve them with technology, that makes that elusive trusted advisor or strategic advisor that people talk about.
Yeah, very well put. I mean, it's amazing to me. Well, you amaze me at very different levels, but one of the most is that you're CEO, you're an excellent writer, you're an excellent speaker. Thank you for speaking at our event.
Thank
You're
you.
passionate about what you do. You're when you go on those walks, when you I know you're working on some more things. When you go on those walks, do you wear some of the sweaters that you knit yourself? I saw your store.
I'm wearing one
I was
now.
gonna
As a matter
ask.
Yeah.
So
I no, usually I'm wearing sweats on my walks.
I say,
But my hats and gloves, yes, I have hand knit. Yeah.
and this is something that calms you down, it gets you off day it's still kind of analytical, isn't it?
Yeah, so it is very, it's so things like walking, knitting, dribbling a basketball over and over again, jumping rope, right? All those things kind of train your brain to get into a rhythm. So I often walk and knit because it just sort of calms you. The running jokes among knitters: one, we knit so we don't kill people. And two, I do have the patience to stab something 10,000 times to achieve an outcome. So you better watch out.
Is there a knitting community? Of course there is. There has to be. Yeah.
Oh,
Yes,
yes.
yes.
There's an online knitting community that has, last time I checked, it was like, I don't know, 8 million users or something. Yeah.
Wow. It's probably a hashtag. It has to be. Yeah.
You would have no idea. Like, if you went down that rabbit hole, we would be there for days. Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. On the podcast, we talk a lot about discipline. We mentioned a little earlier, I lost a lot of weight. people always ask me how I did it, and I always say discipline. I wonder, given the story of you knowing these numbers at such a young age and starting in academics and where you are now, have you considered yourself at an early age a disciplined person?
Oh, so I worked in a knitting shop when I was 13 when my mom said, "You have been 65 your entire life," right? So I was always like
Wow.
the mom of any group. As a matter of fact, some of the vendors will say like, "Oh, there's Channel Mom Marnie nagging us to do this, that, or the other." So yes, I think that I wouldn't have said the word discipline, but for sure I was the 5-year-old that got bossy thrown at her quite a bit.
Mm,
And I've always been fairly regimented. I played D1 volleyball. And
mm.
so, if you're going to be an athlete, and I played sports year round, you kind of have to have, to do all the things, you have to have a disciplined regimen or you just can't get it all done. So, whether it's working 2 jobs or playing sports or whatever it is, you kind of got to get it together.
Yeah, D1, yeah, oh my goodness, D1 is
I should warn folks, I'm shorter than you would think for that. So I was the one with the different colored
oh,
shirt
yeah,
that ran around and played defense,
that's
right?
right, that's right.
I'm not actually 7'2" like they are
Oh,
now. Very
oh, they
jealous, but
are,
not.
they are, and they could jump 3, 4,
Oh, it's
amazing,
yeah.
absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing, and so, now, do you consider like, where does discipline play a role in your life? But do you ever think about it?
Oh, I mean, you can ask anyone in the family. We know my routine, right? I
Yes.
think I think discipline turns into routine. So
Mm.
there's no one that doesn't know I get up at 5:05 in the morning, right? So and and I'm gonna check my email, clear the inbox, see if there are any support tickets before our support team logs in, type of thing.
Wow.
And then I take some me time. I have a hot so I have a consistent process that kind of gets the job done. Um, and there are places when we first started the company, for sure, when you're co-founders, right, you do all the things and you have to do them pell mell in that undefined process
Hmm.
first. And then once I've done it 10 times, I start thinking, okay, how can I do it in bulk or how can I digitize it or automate it? So I always work to improve those bits and pieces, but I certainly am a routine kind of girl. Not that I will vary from that, but it's also no surprise. I'm like at 9:15, I turn into a pumpkin. Like the notifications are off. You won't see me out at,
9:15
at
PM.
events beyond
Yes.
that. Hmm?
9:15 PM.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes,
PM.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Very interesting. And I love how you say discipline equals routine. Is delivering customer success, I mean, do a lot of small businesses, MSPs lack discipline in customer success?
I think they more lack the process than the discipline of it. You can't really have the
Mm,
discipline until you have the process, right? And I think they don't some folks don't know how to focus on that. What does that look and feel like? So we hired one person who had a lot of sales training, but the kind of sales training that I wouldn't recommend for folks. And when I interviewed him, he talked to me about how he really liked helping people, right? And his stories were all somebody called in and they wanted this, and I talked him through what would solve his problem, right? And I said to him, okay, when you can only talk that way about life cyclers, then you can talk to life cyclers.
hmm,
But I don't want any of that sales coming out of your mouth because all we want is for the customers to be happy. So I want you to listen to the problem and solve them. So there is a discipline in that, right? It is quite literally not about selling our product. It is about, do you have a problem? Can we help? I think people are surprised if they ask me who our competitors are, and I will tell them, and they will say, where do you compete? Like, this is where they're strong. If you want that, you should see them. If you want this, you should see us,
hmm,
etc. So I think you have to be focused to create a process that is outcome driven for your customers. And I will argue tooth and nail that if you focus on making your customers happy and solving a pain point for your customers, you will have raving fans and it will grow your business.
mm.
Case in point, we have 700 partners and 0 salespeople. So at IT Nation, 6 of our partners came and stood at the booth with us in order to
Saw
talk
that.
about lifecycle insights. So we really aim to grow raving fans, and I'm willing to, practice what I
Hmm.
preach.
I love how you equate or relate discipline with routine and process. It's very interesting. In what you do, Marnie, is it more art or science?
Oh, it's a little bit of each. So remember, I'm the math teacher who owned a knitting shop,
Right.
right? So I've got a little bit of each. The magic comes in the art of it for sure, but there is enough science behind it that it is repeatable. If it was true art, I don't know that, manufactured like crank out the art is different than unique one at a time art.
Mm,
So I think there is a little bit of both for sure. And the art of it comes into the culture of your company, right? If everyone knows that the end result is to make customers happy, it's easy for folks to think about creative ways to make that happen.
mm. That kinda gets into core values.
Absolutely. Our number one is raving fans.
Mm,
Our second is transparency, because I think if you are just honest with folks, it goes a
it
long
does.
way in establishing credibility.
Yeah, even if you mess up, say, "Look, I'm sorry I messed up. I'm gonna have a solution for you by noon tomorrow." There
Oh, and you just want
that's right.
communication, right? So one day I went to send out an email to 48 folks and I forgot to hit the tag
Ah,
in our marketing platform. And one of our partners sent back. So I instead sent it out to 15,000 people. And one of our partners sent back like, "Hey, Marnie, I think there was a glitch in your marketing system." And I replied back, "Oh, I would love to say that was a glitch. That was me.
human.
I completely didn't add the tag. Please let me not pretend like my technology broke. I did that." And he was totally like, "Oh, I completely understand. I just wanted you to know in case, it was so it wouldn't happen again," type of thing. And I appreciated that. And I think they appreciated the fact that I was like, "No, are you
Hmm,
kidding? I'm not hiding behind that. I did
good
that."
for you. Do you meditate?
I do not, but maybe we would call it meditation. So I go to church on Sundays. I'm Catholic, and I regularly do pray, which is a bit of meditation. And I think knitting for me is very soothing. So I
Mm,
do either yoga or exercise every day. All of those things for me tie together into the same thing. So whether you call it meditation or spirituality or whatever, yeah, there's definitely a piece of me that does that.
and how about journaling? Do you journal?
I don't journal. I don't journal. Yeah, that is that is definitely mainly I'm really busy.
Right.
Like if my hands are doing something that's not work, I am knitting. So
Wow.
I don't journal.
Wow. That sounds like such a great outlet. It sounds like such a great outlet, knitting.
Well, it's productive.
Yeah, it's productive as well.
There are lots of Christmas presents that are gonna happen for the family this year because I knit.
Good for you. Marty Stockman, what motivates you?
Um, I like helping others.
Mm,
Like, I like problem solving. I like being creative, and I like doing that in a way that helps others. So I like working with folks that I enjoy that also like to help others. Um, so I do enjoy accomplishing
mm.
things, right? That are helpful. So I enjoy every day I pop out of bed at 5:05. That is not a struggle for me. I jump out of bed
Wow.
ready to go to tackle the to-dos.
Just the example you cited earlier of that one student, you just did a little bit of analysis and you got to know them, you found out what the issue was and you were able to help them. That's so rewarding.
So rewarding. Yeah. I mean, his twin brother is the one whose baby I just visited. So
Uh,
the two of them still sometimes they come to Thanksgiving at our house.
uh,
They decided I make a good extra mom.
wow. And, how do you measure success?
um, Accomplishing objectives for sure, happiness of others around me,
Mm,
lack of stress in my own life.
hmm.
I think is a big one, right? I absolutely do not appreciate or enjoy drama or confrontation or stress. So seeing the folks around me happy and doing what they want. I one time had to. I was for I don't remember a resume or something. I had to write what my core value was or what my superhero power was. And I was riding bikes with my 16-year-old daughter. She was 16 at the time, and I said I had to say what my superhero power was. And she said, "Well, you know what it is, Mom. It's that you help everybody else become better versions of
Oh,
themselves. And I thought,
wow.
oh, I think my superhero power is birthing children who say things like that about their mother as teenagers. So I am a pleaser person that likes to help.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today, Marnie Stockman. Hashtag Channel Mom.
That is what I've heard. Thank you for having
Thank you
me.
so much. And so, how can we get in touch with you? How can we get your books? They're both on Amazon, certainly.
They are both on Amazon. Unfortunately, being named Marnie Stockman means I'm usually easy to find because
Yes.
there's only one of me. So LinkedIn, if people personally want to reach out and chat anything from knitting to volleyball to math to customer success and QBRs, I'm all in. The books are on Amazon. If you search Marnie Stockman on Amazon, they'll pop up.
Absolutely. And Marnie is Marnie. Stockman is just how
It
you would
is.
imagine. Yes,
Yes, like I need a Stockman on aisle 10.
that's
That's
right.
exactly it.
Marnie, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you again out there on the circuit. Thanks so much for your time today. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations.